Good evening. Is the Russia-Ukraine war likely to end soon? It's been on for 3 years and counting. There are thousands and thousands of lives that have been lost both in Ukraine and in Russia. But can there be peace soon? Can there be a glimmer of peace on the cards? The French President Emmanuel Macron has hinted at a truce between Russia and Ukraine. He's had a meeting with US President Donald Trump, and Emmanuel Macron has indicated that a truce between Russia and Ukraine could be signed in the coming weeks. Could it be so soon? Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has urged the US President Donald Trump to ensure that the security guarantees that Ukraine seeks are provided to Ukraine to ensure that truce can actually be put in place. Donald Trump too has indicated that it's time to restore peace between Russia and Ukraine. He said this war would never have happened had he been the president of the United States of America at that point of time. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, meanwhile, has asked both the United States of America and Europe to ensure that negotiations with Russia lead to a real peace deal and a just peace. That's what Ukraine is talking about, a just peace deal. Zelensky has said it is Donald Trump who can help make peace through strength and with security guarantees being put in place. The United Nations, incidentally, and this is where it becomes extremely interesting, the road ahead. The United Nations spoke of 2 resolutions concerning the Ukrainian crisis. It passed the resolutions. The resolution got 93 votes in favor, 18 against, 65 abstained. But what's extremely interesting is the fact that United States sided with Russia and vetoed the resolution. India voted against the resolution. India, of course, abstained. It becomes extremely interesting, this road ahead. A lot of reactions coming in. Listen in to the US President. I'll get you more on this big story.
I will be meeting with President Zelensky. In fact, he may come in this week or next week to sign the agreement, and which would be nice. I'd love to meet him. Would meet at the Oval Office. So the agreement's being worked on now. They're very close to a final deal. It'll be a deal with rare earths and various other things, and he would like to come, as I understand it, here to sign it, and that would be great with me. I think they then have to get it approved by their council or whoever might approve it, but I'm sure that will happen.
We want peace, and I think the initiative of President Trump is a very positive one. First, to have a truce. I think it could be done in the weeks to come.
From the very start of this war, we have wanted peace, and now more than ever we believe that real and lasting peace is possible if we stand together, of course. And it's essential that we work together so that when we negotiate with Russia, the strongest defenders of freedom are at the table: America, Europe, and the Ukraine. And Ukraine, this is where a real peace deal can happen.
Now, this brings us to multiple questions, and right now, what we are looking at the scenario right now, is a peace deal possible without Ukraine and European Union being on board? Is there merit in the US and Russia talking about building bridges first, settling ground rules, and then Ukraine and EU are taken on board? And what kind of security guarantees can be given to Ukraine to prevent further Russian aggression? Will Ukraine be willing to cede territory that's already lost to Russia? Will Ukraine agree to a mineral extraction contract with the US as compensation for all the aid provided so far or loans given so far? Can Europe contain Russia with reduced US role in NATO? And is non-entry into NATO acceptable to Ukraine? There are multiple questions that we are seeking answers to. I have Professor Brahmachalani, who joins me on this broadcast. He's a former advisor to India's National Security Council. I also have with me Yulia Klemenko. Yulia Klemenko is a member of parliament, and she joins me live from Ukraine on this big story. And Yulia Klemenko, I want to come to you first, and I want to understand from you, what do you make of peace talks that are happening? You heard the French President Emmanuel Macron talk about peace on the horizon. Do you think it's on the horizon?
Hello, thank you first of all for hosting me and having a say. We hear a lot of messages and a lot of reactions for past several months. I would like to remind you that first the message from US and Donald Trump was to finish the war in 24 hours, then it's 100 days. Now we're talking about few weeks. I think it's still far from reality, and I think as more U.S. side and U.S. negotiators talking to Ukraine and Russia, more details they understand how difficult it is to bring peace after all these atrocities Russia done on Ukrainian territories, killing civilians, thousands of civilians, thousands of military people, and doing all war crimes. But
since
Ukraine
you mentioned
wants
territory,
peace.
Ms.
That's
Klemenko,
true.
since you mentioned territory, I want to ask you, there is some conversation that the territory that's already in control of Russia, and this is apart from Donetsk and Luhansk, territories that it already held, or a major part of Donetsk and Luhansk provinces that it already held, Zaporozhye and Kherson. Is Ukraine willing to cede control of these territories to Russia in lieu of peace?
No, Ukraine will not do any concessions because, first of all, it's prohibited by Ukrainian constitution. So it's impossible to do legally, and it's impossible to do, and there is no will of Ukrainians to do it. So I don't think it's feasible. These territories will be state occupied by Russia, and Ukraine will not recognize it as Russian territory. So I don't see any possibility, first of all, legal possibility, how to do it and how to change constitution, because it's prohibited to change constitution in Ukraine during the martial law. So we have martial law because we have war, and it's impossible to change. It's prohibited to change constitution during the martial law. So it's actually a dead end, and this is not possible neither legally nor morally, and Ukrainians will not approve it.
There is some conversation. The Americans are saying we've had a indication from Marco Rubio saying that concessions have to be made by both sides. Russia will have to make some concessions and Ukraine will have to make some concessions. Am I to understand that Ukraine is willing to concede that it will no longer seek joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in case America were to provide adequate security guarantees that Russia will not move forward?
First of all, I would like to remind you that we are Ukraine keeping part of Russian territory. It's Kursk region.
Yes.
So, and we are talking about the exchange of Russian territories on Ukrainian territories. That's what we can discuss. But with the NATO, we don't understand this message from Trump and other allies. We would like to understand what is security guarantees for Ukraine we have. Because we see NATO not as a NATO as alliance, as a security guarantee, sustainable security guarantee for Ukraine. If there is any options on the table, we would like to see what these kind of options we have. Because at this point of time, everybody talking about peace deal, but nobody talking about security guarantees. And we understand that further, sooner or later, Russia will start another invasion, because I would like to remind again that we have a war for 11 years, starting in 2014. And everybody, all international partners told us, don't fight with Russia. They will not move further. Let's stay with these, so to say, concessions. And we trust our international partners. And in 8 years, we had a full-scale invasion. So we do not believe in any words. We want to have real security guarantees, and we see NATO as a security guarantee.
Ma'am, stay with me for a moment. Ms. Klemenko, I want to bring in Professor Brahma Chilani, who's been tracking developments very closely, whether it's in Ukraine, the meetings that are taking place there, the meetings that are taking place in the United States of America, and European leaders who are meeting amongst themselves too. Professor Chilani, was President Trump did he overestimate his capabilities to secure a deal by the time he comes to White House? And now is he realizing it's easier said than done? We've heard the Ukrainian side and getting concessions virtually very, very difficult.
Ending the Ukraine war, no doubt, will be a complex process, especially if the peace is going to be durable. But in just 3 weeks, Trump has changed the US-Russia relationship, that the Cold War that was raging between Moscow and Washington has been replaced with a diplomatic outreach to help end the Ukraine war. And more importantly, the Trump strategy is to drive a wedge in the China-Russia alliance. That has become pivotal to long-term American security. We should not forget that the US won the Cold War, not militarily, but geopolitically, by driving a wedge between Beijing and Moscow. It, in fact, co-opted China in the second half of the Cold War in an informal alliance. That contributed to the Soviet Union's strategic overreach and ultimately to the Soviet Union's breakup, leaving the West triumphant in the Cold War. But today, the 2-against-1 competition has returned, but with the US at the receiving end. China and Russia have ganged up against the US.
Okay.
And Trump realizes that this is going to be very detrimental to America's global primacy.
But is Europe playing ball? Before I bring in Yulia Klemenko once again, Professor Chilani, Europe and America were on the same page. Then NATO was very strong. Now, has Trump also been able to drive a wedge between the pond?
See, Ukraine is caught in the middle between Russia and the US. The Ukraine conflict is essentially a proxy war between Russia and the United States.
Yes.
In this proxy war, the only way out to end this proxy war and to end the suffering in Ukraine is for Russia and the US to reach a peace deal. Europe's role is marginal because Europe relies on the US for its security. Today, it wants the war to continue, but it has no capacity, military or financial, to assist Ukraine in continuing the war. Europe will ultimately fall in line behind the US, no doubt about that. But involving Europe now in the negotiations would be a drag on those peace talks, because in Europe, you have first, there is disunity.
Yes.
Second, Europe is rudderless. It doesn't have a leader that it can look up to. So, rightly, in my view, the US has kept Europe out at the moment, and that's the reason why the Russians and the Americans met for negotiations, not in Europe, but in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Yes,
that
and Ms. Klemenko, does that not weaken Ukraine's hand or Europe's hand? They may be strong in emotion, they are weak when it comes to money power and weapon power. So they may talk big, they don't have the muscle to back their tall claims, point one. And point two, when America says they want the mineral extraction deal as compensation for the war effort so far in the past 3 years, does President Zelensky have an option but to ultimately relent and say yes? Ms. Klemenko, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Look, first of all, I think Mr. Professor is wrong about the major role of US for the supply of money and finance and to Ukraine. If you will take numbers, you will see that that actually Europe, Japan, Norwegia, and many other countries took a big chunk and took a big part of the financing of Ukraine and helping Ukraine to fight this war. First of all, then you have to understand, that's why, we can survive without US money.
Oh, you think you
and
can
fight.
survive without US money? Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. You need just to take money, to take a chart where you will see disbursement from different countries. So it's a very wrong approach that U.S. has a major
But what about without
financing
US
for
weapons?
Ukraine. And yeah, U.S. weapons. Let's be honest. U.S. weapon is the best probably in the world, not only for Ukraine but for Europe, for Japan, for Taiwan, for India, because India is also looking to buy U.S. weapon because they realize that former Soviet Union weapon as well as Russian weapon very weak compared to the U.S. weapon. But now we're seeking a deal with European countries to supply a weapon, not US, and we are producing a lot of weapons, modern weapons, like drones and many others for ourselves. And this is cover a lot of our needs. So this is not an easy answer that if tomorrow US will stop financing or providing weapon, the conflict will end. No, this is not a right approach.
I now want to quickly cut across to the Russian side, Ms. Klemenko, and I want to bring Tatiana Kukhareva, senior journalist from Russia, who joins me on the show. Tatiana, what do you make of the negotiations that are happening right now between United States and Russia, point one, and point two? When Ukraine says it's unwilling to accept ceding any territory, the war will go on. How can there be peace, Tatiana?
Well, look, this is very simple. You know, if Ukraine is not, not prepared to give any territory, then we can very much hear the position from coming out of Moscow. You know, Foreign Minister Lavrov said yesterday that unless our conditions are met, the fighting will go on. So essentially, as the answer to your question, there will not be any peace until Ukraine recognizes the reality on the ground, especially when it comes to the most delusional part of the Ukrainian claims, which is Crimea.
Okay, so that's point one. You will not cede control of Crimea. What about places like Zaporozhye and Kherson? Is Russia holding on to that to return in exchange of Kursk whenever those negotiations take place? And what about the red line on Ukraine not joining NATO? Where does Russia stand on that now?
Well, look, the red line has not budged an inch. The red line was always there. And I'm not just talking about Crimea. I'm saying that this is the most ridiculous claim that the Ukrainian side has been making all this time. But the regions that in 2022 asked to join Russia, I don't believe that Moscow will ever, compromise anything on this territory and these people. It's not about territory, it's about the people, Russian-speaking people who asked to be protected. And when it comes to Kursk, I don't believe that Ukraine has that much to bargain right now, because just a couple of days ago, Russian troops have actually crossed into Ukraine in the Kursk region. So essentially, if, I'm not a military expert, I'm not a politician, I am a journalist, but as far as I remember, at least the tactics used during the World War II, that's what would happen. You would surround the troops and then you would liquidate them. I don't think that Ukraine has that much to offer in terms of any leverage it ever had when it came to the Kursk.
So is Russia indicating it will not cede any territory, whether it's Donetsk or Luhansk, that it already controlled, or major parts of it before this conflict started, and the territories it's taken control of, Zaporozhye and Kherson, it will not let go of these two territories either?
I don't believe that there has been any indication from the Russian leadership that any of these territories would ever be conceded.
Okay. For the final word, I once again want to bring in Professor Brahmachalani. You heard the Russian side, you've heard the Ukrainian side. Professor Brahmachalani, what are options if US and Europe are not on the same page? Or does Europe, like you said, have no option but to fall in line? Because there are some who say, like President Zelensky, that Europe needs to form its own security forces. And you heard Ms. Klemenko say that they will survive with weapons from Ukraine or weapons from Europe and money that comes from Europe and Japan to carry this conflict forward?
Gaurav, the first thing to remember is that Trump's decision to extricate the US from the Ukraine war aligns with long-term American strategic interests. And as Biden himself acknowledged as president, that the only way out from this war is a negotiated settlement.
Yes.
That's exactly what Trump is seeking to achieve. By opening direct dialogue with Moscow, the Trump administration has demonstrated two things. One, its commitment to ending the war, and two, the marginal role that China plays in securing peace in Ukraine.
Yes.
The only nation that benefits from prolonging the war is China.
Absolutely.
In fact, the big winner from this war has been China. And prolonging the war will only ensure that China remains the big winner.
That's the big point that Europe needs to understand. But will Europe understand that point? President Trump understands that point. India understands that point. And that's why everybody is batting for peace and a negotiated settlement. We will continue to track developments on the story very, very closely. To all my guests, many thanks for joining me. And that gives our viewers an idea how difficult is the road ahead for peace.